Hey everybody, welcome to tonight's Talks with Travis. Tonight we are going to be talking about building post-clinic motivation in our participants. We as coaches know that we provide our participants with tools to get better, but the real skill development and honing of those skills happens when they're practicing the skills after the fact. So we're going to talk through some strategies for building motivation. Throughout there, we're going to be introducing times when we can sneak these into our clinics to get our participants already thinking about their practice schedule afterwards. We're going to talk about ways that we can wrap up the clinic to help ensure that our participants continue to practice. And then, of course, talk about some strategies that we can apply to our personal riding to keep things going. And if you have any questions throughout the talk, feel free to drop a question in the chat box or send me an email after the fact at travis@icp.bike or reach out to me on Instagram at travelandtravis. So to jump in for strategies for building motivation, this starts during our introductions. So I think it is important to acknowledge that it took a degree of motivation for our participants to sign up for the course. You know, they're taking some intentional steps to get better at riding, and we're going to applaud that. So get that going right off in the introduction. Applaud their intentional focus on getting better, because that's going to be one thing that helps to lead to more motivation. And I think for every individual rider, it's important to think about why they want to improve. Are they looking to build more self-confidence out of mountain biking? Are they looking to ride features that their friends are able to ride, that sort of thing? So determine why they want to get better. Because if we don't have a reason for getting better, it's going to be a lot harder to stay motivated to practice these skills and really work to hone them. So throughout the talk tonight, I'll be referencing a few different sources. The first is going to be the Sarah Looney Show podcast. She is a professional mountain biker and also works for Ryan Leach Coaching and has an awesome podcast all about mountain biking and all about mindset and performance and all of that sort of stuff. So definitely check out her podcast, the Sarah Looney Show. And she talks about expectations, right? So high expectations typically lead to higher performance, and that can be in the skill. So within a particular skill. So if we push ourselves to improve, we're more likely to reach higher levels of performance, right? Which all makes sense. One thing that we come across with high expectations is a higher chance of us being disappointed in our progress. So we're going to find a balance between what we expect of ourselves and what we can do to stay satisfied in our practice. We will talk about goal setting in a little bit here, and this is going to come back into play. But so on the opposite end of our, high expectations equal higher performance, we've got low expectations. And if we have low personal expectations for ourselves in regard to our riding, we're more likely to be fine if we clear a feature that was maybe a little bit of a challenge, but really not that much. We're going to be happier with that. But that doesn't lead to accelerated development in our riding, right? It kind of gets us to a plateau of that low expectations. So one thing we want our participants to be thinking about is, what are they expecting of themselves, and is that realistic? We'll touch on that more in just a little bit here. There was a website that I had a really good time reading. It was jamesclear.com, and they have a lot of good conversations about motivation. And one point that they were driving home was motivation doesn't necessarily come before we do the things. It comes while we're doing the things, right? So when we are on our bike, we are looking at features and we're trying new things, and motivation is built up as we practice. So the hardest part is putting on our mountain bike shoes and our helmet and taking the steps to get out there. And one thing that we can do to make that easy, or one thing that we can do to make those, get the ball rolling type steps a little bit easier is simplify what it takes for us to practice. So things that we like things that we can do to help make it easier to practice. One thing for me, because there's definitely times when I have struggles like getting myself to go, not just to go ride, but to practice specific skills and that sort of thing. Make it as easy as possible by, maybe not even changing into like your mountain bike jersey and mountain bike shorts. Maybe it is just as simple as like put your shoes and your helmet on and go ride and get whatever clothes you're wearing sweaty for a little bit, and it'll be fine. We'll wash them afterwards, right? So if it takes not having our, 100% of our riding kit on to just go practice some front wheel lifts, go for it. We don't need that, the perfect clothing for the day. We don't need that to practice riding our bike for 15 minutes. Some other things that we can do is keep your gear easily accessible. So instead of having your bike in the back of the house in the shed that you always keep locked, keep it in the garage or find a way to lock it up on a porch or something like that, where, everyone lives in different places. I acknowledge that, but put it in a spot where you're likely to walk past it. Put it in a spot where you can grab it and play for 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever you can put into that, that day. And that goes for your helmet, your shoes, all that sort of stuff. When I'm not in my van, I typically have my bike just like sitting out and ready to go. I have my helmet hanging on my bike and usually my shoes right underneath them. And that way, even if it's just a quick little, okay, I'm going to go ride around in some small circles, or I'm going to go, I've been practicing nose manuals recently. I'm just going to go like to this grassy hill and practice nose manuals for 15 minutes and make it happen. So keep your things accessible. Keep your gear accessible. Another thing that's going to make it easier to practice is schedule our practice time. Putting reminders in our phone, or, if we have like a family calendar, putting, 15-minute chunks like, hey, this is where I'm practicing mountain biking for 15 minutes to a half hour or whatever it is. That is going to help remove the, okay, what else do I have going on today? All of, here's my big list, but because you've intentionally set time aside. And we don't have to think about it. We just know that that's the next thing we need to check off of our list for the day. And when we're scheduling our practice sessions, this doesn't need to be, here's our 2-hour chunk that we're going to practice. In my personal riding, I've found that the more frequent the sessions, not necessarily the duration, but the more frequently that I practice particular skills, the more likely that it is to lead me towards success. And so, and eventually when we're working on, if, manuals and jumping are skills that I have, had to practice a bunch, right? Like they're both challenging skills. And with manuals, there's a point where I was like trying to manual for hours, and my progress went like, kind of took like a gradual slope up and then dramatically went down. As our body starts to fatigue, we start doing things incorrectly. We get frustrated with our performance because, a half hour ago, I had way better manuals than I did at that moment or whatever. So making sure that we are knowing when to call it. And typically, I like to call it, when I'm working on like trial skills, for example, if I'm attempting a particular move and I get it, like, okay, so I do it like 5 times, I get it on the 6th time. Awesome. Okay. Like, let's make sure that I still have that. And then I, maybe get it once or twice more, but then once I fail a bunch, or, and once I'm not successful a bunch, and then maybe get it one last time, at that last time is when I like to call it. I try to end things on a point of success, but that's not always something that we can do. So this sort of thing, this, short, frequent practice is something that I present to my participants as like as straight up like my strategy. Like, so like when I go to practice these skills at home, it's for these amount of times, and they'll hear that and they will start to think that, or it'll start to make it simpler and easier and lower the expectations for the amount of time that they need to put into getting better at riding. Another thing that we can do is that we can recommend that our participants do is start to create a ritual around practice. So this can look like, and creating rituals, it's like when I wake up in the morning, I have my system. Wake up, eat a banana, drink some coffee, hang out for a little bit, eat a bigger breakfast. Like that morning routine that I go through is comforting and it's reliable. And we can create those same routines and one step back. But then when I don't have that routine, I get thrown off. Like when I'm traveling for work or when I'm, in a hotel instead of in my van, all of my day-to-day routines are thrown off. And that can be a little bit of a challenge to adjust to. So we can create these routines for our participants in regards to their practice. So what this can look like, a lot of riders, they're weekend warriors, which is wonderful. So they've got day jobs, or Monday through Friday day jobs. And a ritual that we could work on them building is they come home from work, eat a quick snack, put mountain bike shoes on right away. Or even change right into the mountain bike shoes when they get home, eat a snack, and then go out for 15 minutes. It's these little tiny things that will get them on their bike more consistently, and making that happen each time you make that happen, it's going to be easier and easier to keep it going. So for me, to get myself to practice, I'm not focused on motivating myself to get out and ride. I'm focused on getting myself to put my mountain bike shoes on. One small step. And if I get that one small step done, the rest of the parts come come much easier than if I think about it as a big, huge, grand, I'm going to practice this whatever skill for the next hour. It becomes a little too much to build it into a ritual. So what gets my practice going is just putting on my shoes. That's like step one. Got to make that happen. So let's shift a little bit and start to talk about goal setting. So one thing I like to do with my participants is share my personal riding goals with them. And it's not like, hey, I'm hoping to, nose manual for 40 feet. It's like, hey, this is, these are some of the areas that I'd like to improve on, and here's how I'm going to make that happen. So like I share how I session things or how I prioritize what I want to practice. Like I say, I noticed a consequential feature out on the trail, and I can kind of replicate the skills required to make this happen. And in an example of this, I was just recently teaching a course in Queens, New York. And I was outside after the course, I went for a little ride around Brooklyn, and I was in Prospect Park. And there was this beautiful stump. It was like 38 inches tall, like cut off, like super big around, like a wheelbase length for a bike, or for my mountain bike. And it had like a really smooth, like the roots were just like a perfect smooth up to where it was cut down. And I knew that I would have to like run my front wheel up and get both wheels up on top. And the portion, and that was challenging, and I, took small steps to get there. But the portion that scared me the most, that I didn't want to really do, was get onto my back wheel and hop off, because it wasn't a rollable feature and there wasn't enough space to come in with any speed. So instead of stepping away from that, right, and allowing that hesitation to dictate the rest of my practice session, I found a space. So I knew that I needed to rear wheel hop within the wheelbase of my bike. And I found a space over on some pavement that had like a bunch of, little squares, or a bunch of little pavers with lines. So I could pick out, okay, here's the end of one step and here's the other end, and my bike is going to fit right in here. And so in that space, I could perform the skills that will lead to success when there is consequence associated with it. So instead of thinking about this line as like one move, I recommend participants to analyze the feature, think about what skills need to be done, and then work on those specific skills in a lower risk context. And then they can bring those to the higher consequence type features. And I'm thinking about this in regards to, like, with our participants, you know, riding skinnies. Like, practice on those low to the ground skinnies, which are going to be way less intimidating before we get up to just going for it on a, you know, skinny that has a little bit more consequence. So talking about how to set goals and how you like to, or how you focus on progressing, but coming back to setting expectations for ourselves, set realistic goals. And when we're looking at what our goal can be, it's going to be more effective to set a goal in regards to your process of practice than it will be to an outcome. And the outcome goals are very important. But so an example of this, like my goal is to practice manualing for 15 minutes 3 times a week, versus my goal is to manual for 25 feet. If we focus too much on that 25-foot benchmark for a manual, or whatever distance of manual, you know, if we focus too much on that specific goal, the work that we do to get there, if we're not successful in that work, can feel demoralizing. It can feel like a struggle. All right, so we just had Brittany Marlowe jump on in. I got to work with her in a level 2 course recently, and I'm super stoked to, you know, have her ask some questions as well as like share some more strategies. And we chatted a little bit before I got the recording going again. And Brittany mentioned that in their clinics, they emphasize progress, not perfection. And that kind of, to me, like speaks a little bit to our setting our goals for the process opposed to the outcomes. And I think that's a great way to look at it. And I know there's a lot of coaches, there's other coaches out there that emphasize that as well, because, you know, it helps us continue to feel good about practicing our goals or practicing our mountain bike skills. And when and this kind of comes into setting goals, setting expectations as well. Make sure, if there's a particular feature like a skinny, right? Make sure that that feature isn't too easy or too hard to practice. If we end up getting on too difficult of a feature before we're ready for it, it's more likely to lead to frustration and potentially an incident. So we can go back to what I was chatting about earlier, about that, okay, what skills are required to be successful here and how can I practice those in different ways? So if we are talking about skinnies, we can look at, you know, maybe setting up cones in the same configuration as the elevated skinny that you want to work up towards, and use those cones to kind of mimic and get a feel for what you'll need to do when we do increase the consequence. And the more we practice our goal, or, you know, the more we practice skills, we may need to readjust our goals, and that's okay. That is something that, you know, everybody will have to do at some point when they're working on their skills. And sometimes the readjusting of the goals is like, all right, you know, for this exact, or until let's see, I'm trying, all my examples end up being back in the trials world. But okay, so for example, if my original goal was to work on my level lift, I'm not going to be able to effectively perform a level lift. And if I'm having troubles with that, I'm not going to be able to effectively perform a level lift until I've got my foot wedge and my claw really, really dialed. So maybe we need to reach this higher level goal, we need to step back and look at these fundamental things and change the goal from being practicing our level lifts to honing our foot position and our pedal position on the bike before we can then move back. I kind of think of it sometimes as regressing the skill in that sort of way. You know, we're going to practice a component of it and then bring it back to where we want it to be. And as we practice, we will also be reaching our goals, right? And so we are going to have to, maybe our benchmark went from our 5-foot manual with level 2, and Brittany's looked great, by the way, just saying, move from that goal of 5 feet for our level 2 course and increase that up to our 15-foot ride standard for level 3. So the readjusting of goals goes both forward as we feel that progress and reach our goals, and they also like take steps back as needed. There are some folks that will benefit from tracking progress. Last year, I did a talk about getting prepared for the next level of course. And in that talk, I created like a spreadsheet that had, our skills with like, weeks, like 1 through 6 or something. And then in there, you like, with each week, you make notes about where you're at with that progress towards the ride standard. And that can be beneficial for folks. And it, sometimes that concrete tracking will help drive more engagement from our participants. And those are things that we can provide them with. So, even if we have at the end of the skills clinic during our wrap up, we've got like, you could think of it as like a little report card. And on that report card, it can talk about, all right, this was a wheel lifting clinic, for example. We've got all of our wheel lifts, like marked. We have, like what phases. So how's their load and explode? How's their pull? How's their claw? Whatever, you can indicate on there for them where they were at when they left the clinic. And then they can use that to continue to track their progress. And you can have benchmarks. So, and this could be within the progressions, right? So, we have our progressions for front wheel lift, our practice the load and explode. They got that dialed. All right, check mark. All right, now we had the pull in the claw with no timing. They got that, check mark. And then we can, maybe start to associate some timing and some speed changes and give them more challenges to work on. And they can take that home and maybe they'll use it. I think some folks will, but I think it's just another, thing that something they can put on the fridge and just have them like reminding, hey, this is something that I prioritized a couple weeks ago when I did this clinic, and I want to keep that going. Cool. One thing that I personally need for practicing my skills is some sort of accountability. It's really easy for me to just decide not to intentionally practice and just go for a ride. And going for rides, and not practicing, I think is very important, because that's what we love about mountain biking is riding and having fun on the trail and like reading features as we come to them. That is incredibly important. But I rely on my partner for this. So I will share my goals with her about, hey, these are the skills that I want to work on. And she is willing and generous enough to like pester me about them from time to time, which is really great. This doesn't have to be your partner, right? This can be other friends that you ride with. But a big thing is sharing your goals. If other people know that we're working towards something, we're more likely to, and this is, I guess, maybe just speaking for me personally, but if other people know my goals, I'm much more likely to push myself to reach those goals. And that comes, that in my life largely comes from working on mountain bike skills, because that is like my career at this point. So that is definitely something that's important for me. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have them be your bike practice police, but just like a text message like, hey, how'd bike practice go, or whatever, can be super beneficial. One other thing that I want us to focus on during our practices. So when we're coaching, we get videos of our participants so we can go through them in the clinic, maybe send them to them afterwards, that sort of thing. But I would encourage participants to get videos of themselves. And what this is going to do is allow them to see their progression over time. And it'll allow us to celebrate our successes, even the really small ones. I do love going back to old videos of when I was getting into trials riding, because that's and even when I was started working on my manuals, I love going back into them and then seeing what I was doing then and then knowing where I'm at now. Like that feels really, really good to me, because without some sort of video or pictures, it's hard to remember where we came from when we're working on a particular skill. It's really easy to forget that we started out at a really challenging spot with it, and it's a lot harder to then know how far we've come. So celebrate your successes and share those successes with friends. I think it's pretty common for folks to, especially like riding friends, like, hey, you remember this feature? I finally got it. I'll show you the video if you want to see it. But our friends that we ride with are going to be excited about that too, especially, if you ride together regularly, they know where you're at and they know what you struggle with, and being able to share that you were successful when you were working on these more challenging things is really awesome. Any other thoughts on, Brittany, how do you celebrate success?
I think in the clinic the other weekend, you noticed that sometimes I'm more hard on myself than celebrating that well, but it's something I'm working on. And definitely like group rides and having fun with friends and like having other people celebrate with me is big.
Is huge.
Yeah.
And just to kind of touch on the, like getting frustrated with your, or not that you're getting frustrated, but like feeling the struggle that's associated with riding, and like developing skills. A couple of weeks ago, I did a talk on emotional coaching, and in that we talk about positive self-talk, and that's something that I need to, or I like work to, but I need positive self-talk in my practice sessions. Otherwise, I will get discouraged. I was riding trials out in West Virginia with one of my friends, and I was like, it had been a long day. I was tired. I like forced myself to get on the bike. And I had a friend who didn't ride. He just like lived in the area. He was just hanging out at the restaurant right by like our little trials park. And I've never, ever seen him on a bike, but he was looking at my riding and he was like, Travis, you don't seem super confident tonight. And he's seen me ride a ton. And that really, really stood out to me, when we are not feeling confident, other riders can see that. And for me, it's positive self-talk that will, and like readjusting my goals for that ride or that practice session, that will make me still end the session feeling good, which is where we want to end our sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Any other thoughts on that, Brittany?
Yeah, it's definitely, I think ending on that positive note helps, like it makes you want to come back again right away as quick as you can too.
Totally. And we touched on this briefly before you jumped on, but sometimes it can be hard, like to end on a positive note, because like once especially if it's something that you've been struggling with, it's like, oh, I got it. I want to do it a million times now. But if it's at the end of our practice and we're tired and, we got it and we're tired, continuing to go after that can be really, really hard. So, but yeah, I think ending on a positive note is super important, because we don't want to have these like, and okay, so well, let's talk about that. So that can be challenging at times, right? So one thing, if we don't, maybe reach the level of performance of the skill that we were hoping to, how do we end it on a positive note anyways? And for me, I typically go back to, hey, I typically go back to the process focused goals, that progress, not perfection, right? I'm still out here. I'm still trying my hardest to do this skill. And like, I took the steps to get, out of my van and out of, Netflix world, and get on my bike. And those are things that always are, or being able to acknowledge that we did that, I think is very important too. even if that's the only positive note that we can end on, like, we're going to take it for sure. So the last little thing that I'd like to touch on is how, we can bring all these strategies that I talked about into our personal riding for sure. But one thing that might differ from our personal riding and like our participants' personal riding and what is motivating to them, I feel like us as coaches, we are intrinsically motivated because we love bikes. Like, we love riding bikes and it's super, super fun. And so I think it can be easier for us to make these practice sessions happen. Sometimes, I don't think that's always the case from personal experience. But I think that we have that really, really going for us. And that intrinsic motivation is what we want to try to coach our participants to, which I think is where we come into the importance of staying positive and highlighting the successes that the participants had in our clinics. Because if they think that if they know that they're doing well in certain areas, they're going to feel better about continuing to practice, opposed to if the coach that they had, maybe didn't push as many positives as they could have. They could walk away from that clinic not feeling excited to ride again because of their performance of skills. So we want to try to get our participants feeling as intrinsically motivated as we are. Some things that, the other type of motivation is intrinsic and then extrinsic motivation. And extrinsic motivation are, all of the external factors. So, as coaches, a lot of us make money off of what we do, or, at least offset some of our costs when it comes to buying bikes with what we do. And that is a big deal. I have personally found that there's times when my life is so bike focused that I just need to like step away from my personal riding from time to time, because it's just taken up so much of my life. And it's like wonderful, but also can be a little challenging at times to then get myself to go out and practice a skill on a day when I'm not doing other like work related things, or if I just want to go for a ride or do different activities. So be aware of that. And I think we can counteract the not wanting to push ourselves in our personal riding because of how much time we spend coaching by getting back to what we love. And I think, Brittany, you mentioned when you were talking about celebrating successes, riding with our friends and just like keeping it lighthearted and having a good time, because we can take coaching very, very seriously and take riding very, very seriously. But if that causes us to lose touch with our initial reasons for riding, it's going to lead to decreased performance, which is never a good thing. And another thing that in regards to social media, is a huge form of extrinsic motivation. I mean, they literally keep count of the number of people that were excited about what you did on a bike. And I think that's good, but I also think it can be a little bit of a struggle, because you can perform a skill. Well, so a couple of reasons that it can be a bit of a struggle, right? So we can perform a skill that is very challenging for us, and you're happy with the performance, you're stoked on it, and then you post it on social media and it doesn't get the 10,000 likes that some other person doing a 5-foot wheelie did. And that is like a major struggle, because we don't want to be comparing ourselves based on those parameters. It is just not a healthy way for us to keep our personal progress going. And so that's like another sort of thing to be aware of is, what are we doing with the videos that we're taking? Are we using them to make ourselves feel better? Because that's what I think is the best use of these videos. Or are we using it to share and get likes on social media? It can be a fine line to walk for sure, but that's just something we want to be aware of is our motivation coming from inside because we want to do it, or is it coming from we're being paid to do it? Is it coming from, social media? Is it coming from purely from approval from friends, that sort of thing? and always come back to what is most important for you in your personal riding. And I think one area that I've experienced this outside of, social media and pay, I have a lot of the friends that I ride with, they are way faster on downhills and are way more willing to take higher risks than I am. And so if my motivation is solely to perform at the level that they are, and because personally, I don't really care about riding that fast. But if my motivation is to keep up with them or to ride like they do, it's not coming from the right place for it to be consistent and likely to lead to solid growth in our riding. Cool. Well, so that was what I had. There's a bunch of stuff in there, and Brittany and I, we chatted about what I went through in the very beginning of it, but we talked about a lot of different strategies for building motivation, including setting goals, making it as easy as possible to practice, scheduling your practice sessions, and talking about, and then, progress tracking if that's something that works for our participants. But we touched on how we can drop these hints into our clinics and get those folks riding. And definitely at the beginning and at the end of clinics, I like to talk about how, when I'm working with private groups, I like to talk about how our goal as coaches is not to necessarily make you better riders today, but our goal is to provide you with the knowledge that you need to become a better rider 3 months from now, when you have time to practice and you have time to apply these skills. And I think calling that out in the intro, calling that up as you're wrapping up the clinic, can be a great way to get folks setting realistic expectations for the clinic at the beginning, and then also for their practice moving forward. And Brittany, that's all I had for the night. Do you have any last minute thoughts, questions, anything? You can throw it in the chat if you'd like to.
No real last minute thoughts. I definitely needed this just to think about moving forward for myself and for how I talk to participants and that kind of thing too. Because
Totally.
sometimes it's easy when people come with lots of they get really excited and stoked and that kind of thing, and then we see them on the trail or wherever a month or two later, and they're back to not really, they're being, I don't know, they haven't really practiced any of their skills and they feel like they can't get back to it, and just reminding them of that, continuing to do the small steps forward rather than expecting big change.
Totally. And well, I hope you got a couple of fun things out of it. And sure. I think that, and also the talk that goes really, really well alongside this one is our emotional coaching one. And that we talk more in depth about, framing our courses. We talk more in depth about making sure our participants are feeling good. And that is emotional coaching, I think, is, one of the most important things that we can do as instructors. So definitely check that out. It was inspired by a very impactful clinic that my partner went through, and it was like a game changer just from some solid emotional and self-care. And super, super good. So, well, Brittany, I'm sure we'll be talking real soon, and I'm excited to, see some more videos and get some more progress.
Cool. Thanks, Travis.
All right, Brittany, you have a good rest of the day. Thanks for jumping in.
Bye.
Bye.